Lens Pictures, and we're live again. I'm Brent Norrie, and we're going to do another session of our reading series we've been going through for the new novel, The Flower Maker. And again, those of you who are following along right now, you're following along as the novel is being written, and so hopefully you can get a little bit of a kick out of that. I'm going to try and jump right into it today without explaining too much of where we are, other than we're going to finish up chapter 5 today, and we've got a bunch of pages to get through again today. So last video was pretty long. I don't like them to be 30 minutes, but that's why we'll get right into it. Thank you all for tuning in. Like and subscribe. Get active in the chat, and I'll speak to you all right after I'm done reading. So again, this is from chapter 5 of The Flower Maker by Brent Norrie. He had gone home to study the particular gesture she had shown him, and he couldn't find it. Simply the namaste reading of putting one's palms together like in prayer. And he thought maybe he had confused the entire thing in translation. And she hadn't been there the last couple days for him to maybe bring the subject of the gesture up. But in that time, he had derived a nickname for her. Until he knew her real name, he would call her Lakshmi, for he felt that's what her spirit might be. And he was an avatar of Vishnu. And he started to think on a life with her. He allowed himself this much fantasy. What a different life it could be. They had come from completely different upbringings, and still somehow he thought it could be as a Benjamin Buttons meeting in the middle, though he knew it could never be, and therefore it couldn't be. But maybe she was an avatar too, like a Mitravinda, and she could choose who she wants to marry for love. He thought of the idea that all of the gods were convening and mapping out territory in his plans. They liked the idea of his flower. They could claim it as their own. And he had no defense over that, for he owed it to them, and he was grateful for the gifts, though in the dark hours he rued their torment. They don't understand a mortal body. Do the gods feel pain? Do ideas feel pain? You could start with one bubble, and before you knew it, it was a boiling pot. But you might be in one bubble, surrounded by others, as a simulacrum, unaware of the pot, or the flame, or the switch, or the hand, or the hunger. And you could journal on journals themselves, as critics do. And you could be lost in something such as a moment, and ponder it into its fractals. And you could try to perfect it, reconstruct it, back in the perfect place, where it all lasts forever, where the people you meet are there, as they are perfect representations of themselves. Was that the key to heaven, or the idea of how it could look, where the perfect things of infinite slices were just that, perfect and infinite? What a task to be God's eyes, all of us, some way giving it a taste of the view. Its rules are its and ours, if we are of it, which it seems to be. He had given up formal religion years ago, due to the perversion of Christ's message. But somehow, through rethinking and traveling the world's ideas, it was returning, the truly spiritual. And it was through science, the science of things, the search for answers, with the pessimistic, skeptical mind, or a hero's journey. But those things, in a sense, also had passed. He was on a divine mission, through art, to release something special, the most beautiful flower, His mind couldn't get off it now, this idea of the flower maker. It was sustaining his day and concentration of thought to some degree. He wanted to know how they would reach the end. Excuse me. He wanted to know how they would reach the end he had in mind. End of chapter 5. Chapter 6 of The Flower Maker by Brent Norrie. Chapter 6, The Anis Horribilis. It was a firefly this time. Jade. He thought of his sister, as he always did when seeing a dragonfly or butterfly. He insisted without a surety that it was a butterfly tattoo Jade had on her shoulder, and his mother would say no, it was a dragonfly. Half the time he thought his mother might be right about that. Jade had died in the Anis Horribilis, a year that always sat on the stovetop of his cognition. It would always be there. Now, 10 years since, he had learned to live with it, and he had learned from it. He would never again underappreciate things he loved or moments that came along. And the Horribilis had given rise to his re-life with art. He had only painted twice, 2 paintings while with R.A., and in the year of horrible things, he would immerse himself in painting and music and history. He would teach himself guitar and wake up at 7 a.m. and drink a glass of rum of low shelf into a dizzying daily disorder. Hurt was his enemy, and the enemy to his enemy was loving pain. He had returned to thinking about oppressors, empires, and republics. He had thought America was like a drunk guy at a party that pulls out a machine gun and starts waving it around at everyone, demanding that they like him and also his ideas. The party was the world. But nothing was as simple as an image or meme. History was an Escher staircase. You'd have to look close to see what's going on, and then pull back to see the full illusion. All the empires came to be in the same way, and they would all fall the same way, and republics seemed doomed from the start, ignoring the entire obviousness of the truth. There's a whole other world out there. Maybe it's primal wishes, this republic thing. We can all be the same, as citizens in our land of sameness. Republics will always wish their empires had stayed that way. The good old days, when we knew who we were. With empires, we must be concerned with us becoming them, and them being us, and the gathering of elites to extract from everyone's lives. If he didn't stop and think about things, pages could be missing, lost pages in the wind, and maybe he could come back to it, if forgotten. But that would be something of a second draft and not the rendered original. What if first impressions were right, but not always, and hence the need for a second draft, to review what we're up to? But like a curator deciding to clean up a grand masterpiece by Da Vinci, something could be lost in that cleaning up, like hundreds of years of history and viewings. But when should art be nurtured by its inheritors? At what point would the artist want his rotting piece to be saved? Perhaps changed, and now ambiguous to its initial purpose. Should we save something in dire straits? Sure, we should save something in dire straits, as to not lose it to the wind. And the Horribilis had been a type of first draft of things to come. It was its own organism of sorts. It had kept growing throughout the year, to the point where, by the end of it, the artist believed himself cursed and that God was conspiring against him. It started with the unexpected death of his father. There had been some mystery to it, as in, the coroner declared it a heart attack, though he had fallen and hit his face on the floor of the kitchen. Blood had poured through the floor and down to the basement where his father had been bringing up laundry. His, his father was on blood thinning medication and had suffered a previous drunken laceration that almost made him bleed out on the porch from simply jamming his shin on the step. The artist thought perhaps he had fallen and hit his nose and bled until heart attack. He would never know, and by the end of the year, his sister would be found not more than 3 feet from where their father perished. They had looked the same, people had said. He like his father, and he like his sister. Halfway in between the deaths, R.A. had finally left, though she consoled him and was actually with him when he heard the news of his sister. R.A. had been the one to call him at work about his father. A life has many parts, but he felt he could break his up in two: before R.A., with R.A., after R.A. She was a bit of a vortex in the middle, where things in the beginning pointed towards and everything after pointed away. And he had grown to be okay with this because R.A. was happy, and they really weren't quite made for each other. Despite the easy conversation between the two, which he attributed to her nature, they butted heads on some important things. She hadn't wanted kids, and he did, but by the end, he had bought into her concept, and she into his. And she no longer thought of him as someone to be a good father, or the father of her kids, which was a new thing for her in her approach to 40 years old. Not that she thought he would be a bad father, in fact, the opposite. But she didn't see him as a father, still too much of a child. And his daily caring for his dementia-ridden grandmother after the loss of his father pulled them apart. The Horribilis would take on a freight train-style crash and destruction. After the breakup, then came the death of Jade, then the father of Jade's child, then his best friend from school, then his cat. Then the government came in with social services and told him he couldn't care for his grandmother properly, so they kidnapped her and put her in a home to die a couple months later, which he had declared to the judge in court would happen if she was taken. He was throwing up blood in the morning and got a crick in his neck that never went away. Old age was setting in quick, and the blonde hairs in his beard mixed among the dark had shifted to silver and white almost overnight. The world was not the place he had thought of years ago. There was only one place that felt real to him: the engaging in one's art, and, as if a light had switched, lectures on all subjects were now deliciously interesting to him. Who knows when Minerva will arrive like the edge of the muse's blade? She waits and bides her time. Then she swoops in, with whispers in your ear, little drips of confidence, a savior of heroes. You never see her, this sister to Gabriel. She happens between the space of change, and before you know it, someone has won or lost. She finally arrived with the first sighting of perhaps the end of the Horribilis. A friend of the artist suffered a heart attack and this time survived. Though it was another sign of the new wicked world he was in, the fact his friend had made it through gave him a measure of that elusive thing with wings: hope. The tunnel had light, and the walls were painted with his most surreal touches. An endless Sistine Chapel behind him and around him. Ahead was unknown, but there would be something. That he couldn't quite see, but it was bright. He knew nothing yet of the greenhouse and the flower within. End of chapter 6. The Flower Maker by Brent Norrie. Chapter 7. The Orphan. Brrr. It was his mother, texting him. See you tonight. Looking forward to it. Ava Margot will be coming, she said. This gave him a type of joy you'd only see in a Fred Astaire dance or a person who could suddenly jump higher than ever before, a grandpa taking Charlie's golden ticket. She would be there, and in this time in his life, she was the most important person he wished to build a relationship, his niece, the orphan. It had been uppy and all hugs and smiles when she was a child, though at times he thought she fell too much into the tea party world of pure fantasy and living stuffed animals as her father might. Her father, though a poet of sorts, could never really tell the truth. It was all exaggerated, a pathological over-embellishment of every story, as if to say his life was more important than it was. And he was not a bad man. He was disturbed, and this was the reason he would say he couldn't keep a job. He had thought about how to tell her all the things that he knew about them. But she wouldn't understand then. She turned 3 days after Jade's death. But she had been asking recently, and she was old enough now at 13. But what could he say in so little time with her? The three of them, mother, niece, and him, would vacation each year in Old Orchard, Maine, near the center of town, along the beach, next to the amusement park. R.A. and Gray had even come up for a day this year. And as the days would go and into the night, he would finally have chances at conversations with Ava Margot and things like what her new interests were in life, and he would try to impart information of the good kind and listen to things she said. He knew his stepfather would not do this, listen. He was known to say things to children like, "What are you, stupid?" and "Stop asking questions." His mother had left his father for a sociopath, an Italian Republican from Revere, Massachusetts, of the management type. He would come to find out years later, as his stepfather retired broke in his 50s and allowed his mother to continue working into her late years to sustain income for the home, that he had acquired his management position by being a scab and crossing picket lines. He was the type. What's good for him, always. The artist and his sister had known this almost immediately and had lived in a daze of confusion for quite a while since the age of 4 and 6 that something was going wrong. Dad was such a good guy, and he was the devil. But over time it set in. We would have to get used to this. A strange feeling in the room always, as though somebody didn't want you there. He had gotten away at 10, telling his mother to her face while sitting in the car in late August that he was going to live with Dad. Those 3 years were a gap in the relationship with his mother and sister. It had been brewing. The time would come when she would have questions, and he hoped she would have questions. He was becoming the type of person who had answers to questions, or at least was an expert in asking questions, and so he knew what some of the questions might be, and he had tried to give as much of the cheat sheet as possible to both Ava Margot and Gray. She had been fantastic in theater and chorus for the last few years, but now she had given it up. She had even talked of NYU, but now no more. She didn't like it anymore. She had stolen the show as the stand-in actor for the Scarecrow role in the Wizard of Oz play, and everyone remarked on her talent. Her singing and acting seemed to be the thing she was good at. He couldn't understand how his parents, her guardians, could possibly let her give up such things in favor of soccer or basketball, which she never practiced or cared much for. He thought they were allowing her bad habits for life, and he was always concerned she wouldn't be prepared. End of chapter 7. The Flower Maker by Brent Norrie. Chapter 8. In the Mansion. A plane flew overhead, head for a landing at Manchester, Boston. What were they up to? The people there in the clouds. Were they on vacation or working? Were they watching a movie or reading? Were they at the best part and now had to put it down for landing? Would they return to the story? He thought of the story he'd been pondering all day. Was it becoming something from these little vignettes? Was his flower growing inside the greenhouse where no one could see, not even himself? What would it look like? And could he even describe such a thing? Would the reader then have to become the viewer and imagine it in their own way? Could the pollen somehow reach their noses through sixth sense? Would they understand what this type of honey would taste like? It would taste like the part of dreams where friends of the past come and visit you. And every time you tasted it, it would always be the same and different. And just like that, he was back in the mansion, thinking on flower petals, inside the beekeeper's mind, wondering why the bees kept dying. The beekeeper would be investigating such a thing. Why was the queen not laying eggs? Why was there a strange diseased comb with every batch of bees he would bring, and the previous would die? He wanted to see inside of the greenhouse, the thing that was in there. The scientist was pacing the room, speaking to himself in what sounded like Latin. The beekeeper couldn't make it out, and then, for the first time, the lady, once an apparition, appeared in the flesh. Coming through the doorway, soft as silk, she moved as though there were traces of her everywhere. She nodded at him and spoke to the scientist, but he didn't hear her. He kept about his pacing. She looked towards the beekeeper. He thought to introduce himself. "Is there still no honey?" she said with a slight grin. Then, with a widening smile, she threw her head back and laughed. "His flower is so beautiful, it's unbelievable." He remembered his name, Stellan. He reached out his hand to greet her. Again, he didn't know her name. What would her name be? The beekeeper already knew her name, as her being of a prominent family and of having some fame from her beauty before the Svengali spell had hid her away. But the artist needed her to have a good name, one for all times, like Murasaki and the Tale of Genji. One where in 1,000 years, if his name had been lost to time, the author may be named after a character in the book. But Murasaki meant lavender, and that was the name of flower. Not the flower from his story, but the other from his past. Panda, Panda, also known as lavender, had changed her name to Flower, and he wondered if he could use her again. They were all connected anyways. They were all connected anyways. Maybe naming her a flower was a bit too on the nose, but it may attract the beekeeper, if he wasn't already, which he assuredly was. He waited in suspense for her reply, feeling his heart starting to pound as slow motion set in, a universe swirling in her eyes. "I'm Maris," she replied. And that's where we are, folks. We're all caught up. 25-minute video. I don't see anyone in the chat. We didn't get anybody in the chat today. That's all right. Appreciate everyone who tuned in. Thanks for staying along with this journey. And again, feel free to go back. There's a playlist on Blurred Lens Pictures for the Flower Maker, and you can catch up on all these videos. We're up to, I think this was number 9, I said. And we'll be trying to do a new one each day. The story's coming along. Again, with the playlist, you can take your time. And hopefully if you like and subscribe, this pops up on your channel for you. Either way, appreciate y'all. Have a great day. Thank you.